Bitcoin traders, thanks for joining me for the show. How we doing? Looking at Algorand ALGO on that ticker today. A lot of nice bullish things happening in the short term after currently working on the fourth nice bullish day after a little bit of a pullback where we did break through a pretty big level of closing support. So do have a lot of things to talk about in the show, especially since we're looking at this very nice breakout from a little bit more of a longer term descending triangle type pattern, especially after such a big pullback. But because we have been in this overall pattern for about 2 months, this is a little bit more relevant of a breakout to be talking about. So let's talk about what happens next and what we actually have to see if we do talk about continued bullish upside for Algorand. As always, if you do like the show and this type of content, and especially Algorand, do hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you haven't done so just yet. And also make sure to go ahead and drop me a follow over here on Twitter at coin_trades is the handle. Do talk a lot of things about Algorand, especially price analysis, potential things like that, good and bad across the community. But yeah, so specifically, let's start talking about this daily setup and pattern, because if we actually go ahead and start off analyzing this pattern a little bit more, do want to start talking about the overall falling triangle or descending triangle type pattern, because if we actually look at closes, you can see that the last couple of days here have actually been extremely nice breaks and close with a little bit more of that follow through from this descending trend line on this descending triangle. So now even going ahead and taking a look at the volume down below, very nice setup here with some decreasing bearish volume on these 3 days, which allowed the bulls to confirm support right at 1050. And then now 3 days in a row, seeing consecutive day on day increases in a bullish volume. Now, one of the things to be extremely mindful of, though, is that on the last 2 attempts, or actually 3 attempts rather, we did get stuck up in this big zone between the 26 and 50 period exponential moving average. So since we have been experiencing big resistance in the middle point, essentially, of this zone, we could be looking at effectively running up, testing about 1150, and then potentially getting stuck up at that level as a big resistance point. Now, several other things to be looking at when we talk about the recent, and specifically probably about the last month on this algo chart. So if we actually zoom out, looking at levels of closing resistance and closing support, these are very apparent and extreme, which is why they're so relevant. So looking back to the left, after the 13th of July, extremely nice bullish candle did come in, held closing support right at 1135, and then after this bearish candle pushed us below that level, actually saw support coming in just below the 11-cent line at 1094. So this level was holding for about just over a week before another solid bearish candle broke that level, confirmed support, and now we're seeing all of this nice bullish volume and increasing price action. So when we typically see these type of stair-step patterns and then blow through both levels, well, we're actually getting stuck up at the 1135 right now, but the resistance point that we did experience previously at 1115 was a big zone that we actually just saw the bulls annihilate on the last day's candle. Now, you probably always heard me talk on the channel about how we love to see follow through. Well, this is only one component of the equation when we talk about actually breaking out bullish, because not only do we need to see a breakout with some follow through, which is exactly what we're seeing right now, but in addition, we actually need to confirm support by back testing some of the previous resistances as that support. So right now, the fact that we've actually blown through this 11-cent or 1094 prior support line, and then seeing a very nice close on the most recent daily candle that closed above 1114 is a very good sign of breaking through such big, strong, extreme resistances. And so especially if we look far left, right after we saw Algo hit its all-time low right now, we were looking at a closing level of support coming in just above 11-cent at 1107. And so this is kind of like why also it is so significant when we do talk about the most recent range of trading that we saw before the recent bearish break that tested the lows at 1050 once again. So because essentially what we always talk about is previous support turns into resistance, we do have that confirmation, especially the longer it does get tested. So when we have tests for about a week and a half like what we saw, that's a lot more of a sign that this should be that support on the back test and way forward, allowing the next pump to the upside to happen if in fact that is what we do see occur. So keep in mind now, because we are getting stuck up in the zone between 12 and 26, which is exactly what we've seen every other single time that Algo has had a very nice pump to the upside and get stuck up in between 26 and 50, in between 26 and 50, and in between 26 and 50. So right now, bulls are experiencing that same type of action once again coming in, where we do see prices right now above the 26, which is currently at 1118. However, the 50 is between 1178. So a pretty big wide range that we are anticipating to get stuck up at. But especially since right now we are testing this previous level of closing support, it is now likely going to be a very big point of closing resistance, once again coming in at about 1135. And at the extreme point, testing the upper end of that resistance line at about 1160, which I don't really anticipate coming in anytime soon, especially since we have had now 4 days of nice bullish upside. And the other thing too is that we are looking at overall struggling crypto prices. So we do see a little bit of bullishness on the day, but overall, if we look at Bitcoin, for example, still a lot of bearish signs that we're going to have to overcome. So if we can see a lot of bullishness out of Bitcoin now and some breaking a lot of these resistance points overhead, then that's going to be a opportunity for Bitcoin, or excuse me, algo bulls to have this nice bullish breakout, provide that continuation and longer term growth potential. But unfortunately, because the crypto markets are always so tied to each other, if we don't get that and we do see a further pullback from Bitcoin, for example, that could be a potential catastrophic scenario despite the nice bullish breakout that we're seeing right now. All right, so now moving into the weekly chart, lots to go over on the weekly chart because we have a very nice level of closing support, as we can see, just below the 11-cent line right now, currently coming in at about 1091, which I actually drew a little high here. And so on this weekly as well, a very perfect setup forming since basically the spring in April of just a continuous downtrend resistance line. And we are on the logarithmic scale, but we're still looking at a very perfect, picture perfect line in any way, forming this very nice descending triangle. Typically, we are going to anticipate a little bit of a bearish break from this. But like we mentioned, a lot of things looking bullish for a nice bullish breakout, especially after such strong defense for about the last 2 months on this price line, which we actually have never seen before, is such a strong defense of an overall price line in terms of closing support. So that's really one of the things that makes this chart, especially the weekly here, so important and such a factor to keep our eye on, because it has been so relevant, forming a picture perfect pattern for so long. So for about 4 months now, we've been experiencing this downtrend resistance line playing a huge factor on pushing prices to the downside, but especially now after finding higher low, higher low, higher low, and even on the current week, higher low. And then not only are we finding price higher lows, but we're also maintaining a very strong level of closing support. So unless we actually get a close and a break below that level, which again right now is about 1091, a lot more of the focus is going to be on the downtrend resistance line, since that's the most likely right now at this point to break. So since we're very much in this apex of this tightening wedge formation, as the two lines do converge, it almost acts as a very strong pressure cooker. And that's even more so the case when we do get these lines lasting and proving confirmed irrelevancy for this long. So now one of the things we also need to see too is that for the last month, we've actually seen a decrease in all volume, but specifically we have seen that in a bullish volume. So in order to invalidate that and confirm a bullish breakout, we would actually need to get a lot higher bullish volume on the current candle. So the last week saw a close of 147.306 million. Currently being just over a day in, we are at 28.26. So effectively, we are on track to be able to see that break at 147. Typically what happens is that when we do get the first initial breakout, we do start to see a little bit more of a flood of volume before we do get that back test confirmation and signal. Once we actually do get those, then we'll start to see a little bit more volume as well. And that's when a little bit more of the longer term volume come in, which will actually push the longer term week over week volume continuing to the upside, which will help confirm a longer term breakout, in this being the longer term floor for Algorand. Now, I do want to pull up the weekly RSI Relative Strength Index, just because if we talk about where we actually bottomed out on the huge flush and low back in June, the start of June, when we did bottom out for Algorand at the 9-cent level, we've actually started to find an establishment of support on top of the 32 line. And so since we've been establishing a low of support for the RSI after finding a bottom when we did have the weekly close at 28.9, especially if now we can see the weekly run up and actually break the previous high right now, which was at 36.01, That's going to be another one of the strong confirmation signals that's going to start having this weekly RSI trending back to the upside and providing a little bit more of that bullish momentum. Now, flipping over into the 4-hour, we're going to look at the shorter term charts here really quick before we wrap up. So 4-hour right now is looking very good, but especially after this RSI has rallied up and smashed twice above the 70 line, we are going to get a little bit more of that selling pressure, especially as we do start to hit into these resistances around 1150. And one of the things that we have to keep aware of, which is why we looked at signals like this, is that every single time, the last previous times that it's happened, we have seen a little bit of a pullback, especially when we run into resistance. So overbought signals are more of a reversal sign than we do see oversold in bearish markets. So because we are still more or less in a bearish market, even on the shorter, longer term, overbought indications are a lot more of that sign, especially as we hit resistance points of being a little of that indication that sell-off is going to be coming. Now, again, nothing in here is ever science, so that's not a guarantee, but typically that is what we see, and that's another reason why we analyze previous signals and previous charts with their current market conditions. So if we do pull up the VPVR volume profile visible range right here on the right, you can see the point of price is stuck up around where we are finding center of mass. So despite finding blowing just above that big resistance point in terms of mass is still going to be coming in until about 1170 or so, which is where we topped out before finding this stair-step pattern to the downside and finding this support right at 1050. So again, another very strong zone, which is why when we do talk about consolidation points and approaching apexes of patterns, it is so key and critical to get those very nice strong breakouts, that strong volume, the back test, and then the confirmation once again. At this point, it's all going to come down to being patient though, because we know that even with a breakout, nothing is strong and confirmed just yet, especially in these market conditions, until it actually does take time to prove and confirm the backtest of support, and then also the future follow-on rally with a lot more of that increasing bullish volume. And that's really when we start to get our confirmation signal. So again, as we wrap up, very nice to see 4 days of nice bullish upside out of algo, but we are going to start to get stuck up right now in this zone. However, the thing I failed to mention before is that this zone is actually starting to get tighter and tighter together, which is always a good sign of what we typically need to see when we actually do expect to get a little bit more of that bullish reversal and a bullish cross on these exponential moving averages. So the fact that we actually have recently gotten a new higher high compared to what we saw on the last push before this flush down to 1050 is a lot more, is that sign we like seeing, since we always have to find and discover new higher highs, get stuck up at resistance, pull back, confirm higher lows. So we may have already had our nice bullish confirmation breakout for this pattern, but we do need to see the backtest and establishment of that support, especially if it does backtest this previous resistance line. That's really going to be our good signal and our very nice entry point, especially since you can set a stop just below that. But at this point, we are expecting a little bit more of a sentiment change, especially after confirming some of those lows of support, which is why this pattern really could be set up to explode if and when we actually do get that. As always, though, do love hearing everyone's questions, comments, issues, predictions, disagreements down in the comments section, so make sure you do drop me a note down below, and I do love getting back to each and every one of you. That is actually going to wrap up the show and take us out for today. Hope everyone enjoyed. Once again, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. Post whether or not you are buying algo and your predictions down below. Do stay safe, take care, and I will catch you back in the next video.